Welcome back, everyone, to Moving Offline. Today, we have Andrew Feinstein. He is going to be sharing his experience of not using a phone completely for 30 days. Think about that. Going on without a phone. We're going to talk about his vacation, his time away, and also what it felt to truly have no access to communication except essentially smoke signals and letters. So, we'll talk about that and we'll get to it. Andrew, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your experience. Tell us a little bit about you and what do you do and how did you come up with this idea for the 30-day no phone project?
Yeah, Jose, man, thank you, man, for having me. I'm super excited. This project has been super interesting for me. I am a YouTuber, content creator. I've been a videographer and editor for years now and have recently started making my own content. And as the new year turned, I realized that I was on my phone 24/7. As people that are in the content industry, I find that we scroll Instagram or watch a YouTube video as a way to get inspiration. And that's what I kept telling myself. I'm like, I'm doing work, I'm trying to get inspired. And all of a sudden, I was like, I spending like 4 hours a day on a screen and not including work, like literally 4 hours of just scrolling mindlessly on different platforms. And for me, when I started to do the math, I was like, that's a really big chunk of my life. Even if it's 16% of my life, that's 16% that I could do so much with. I could spend more time making relationships with people. I could spend more time working on stuff that really matters to me. I was somebody who really wanted to be highly productive. And when I started to see these numbers, I was like, I have to make a change. So in the beginning of this year, I decided to completely get rid of my phone. I put it in a lockbox, which is actually right back there, that has a 30-day timer. So I literally could not get to it. So it's completely locked, no access whatsoever. I've just been kind of going about my life, which, as you've mentioned, has had twists and turns. I had to travel outside the country during this experience. I had to drive a bunch of places that I had never been before. And I've navigated a bunch of these, as we call them, friction points without a phone. And now, nearing the end, I'm on day 28 as we record this. I'm getting ready to bring it back in and really thinking about how do I bring my phone back in a way that actually is beneficial to my life.
I definitely understand the need to have a device, a smartphone or a smart device in order to create content. You want to publish, you want to be able to market. Have you found that during this time period, as you've been working through this project and you've been maybe doing other things for your job, how did things get really increasingly difficult? Were there actual gaps that you missed opportunities to be with people? I mean, you still have a computer, you still have access to certain smart devices, I would assume, in order to get your job done. But was there like a massive gap that you felt that it was actually detrimental to your experience as a human, not just a minor inconvenience here and there?
Yeah, for me, I think originally there were friction points. So there were points throughout the process where I was just mildly uncomfortable. For example, there were a few times where I missed like a meeting because I didn't have an alarm clock to wake me up at first. And like my whole life just kind of got reconfigured. I was only a couple minutes late. The clients that I were working with are close connections anyway, so they understood. They knew that I was going through the experience. I made a point of trying to let everybody know. So there were definitely moments where I was like, okay, this is super inconvenient for a lot of other people in my life, where people are, contacting me through my girlfriend now. People are, finding ways to get to me. But all in all, the people that really mattered in my life have been able to still stay in touch with me. I haven't had to, like, I haven't lost relationships because I got rid of my phone. I feel like there hasn't been anything that has been super detrimental aside from just like mild friction points early on, which most have resolved themselves since. I've figured out that I pretty much know how to drive everywhere in the city now. And if I look some address up, I can find it without having to have navigation. And, if I don't, I just use MapQuest, which has been a hilarious experience to try to figure out, but it's made for great content as well. But yeah, I also, in this time, I haven't posted on Instagram. I haven't been on any social media. And that's been completely fine too. I haven't felt like I've been missing out. I just think that like these things are tools and they can be used when they need to. But for me, the overuse, like I've just been glad to not have to even think about it for 30 days.
It seems that you also had a period here that was helpful to you. You'd said that you went on a vacation before we started this podcast, recording it. You mentioned that you went on a vacation. And of course, that time period, you're abroad, you don't need a phone per se because you're abroad, you don't have a lot of connectivity or, signal available. Maybe you can purchase a local SIM card or whatnot, but people know you're away, they don't have to contact you. So that was kind of like a bonus. But you also mentioned that there were not so many bonuses during that experience as well. So let's talk about that. So you went to a different country. How did you get to the airport without a QR code? Or, I mean, that's just the stupid one, a lot of people that use nowadays the QR codes. But, talk to me about going to the airport, getting there, getting to a different country. It was a little bit of time off and a little bit of a cheat sheet, but you got to experience something else that you were not experiencing before. So let's walk through it.
Definitely. I was lucky that I was traveling with people. So I think if I wasn't traveling with people, it would have been a lot more of a logistical challenge. Most of our travel was set up. We had, it was literally a plane. So I went to Costa Rica and I went to a small village in Costa Rica. So it was a plane from California to San Jose, Costa Rica. We stayed overnight at a hotel. We then got on a little puddle jumper plane the next morning. That was like a 20-minute flight and then a 45-minute drive. So having to do all of that without a phone, if anything went wrong, I would have been screwed. So luckily, I was traveling with people, but it was interesting, right? I got to the airport and right away, there's a big sign that's like, don't have a boarding pass? Scan this QR code. And I was like, well, I can't do that. So, I did the thing. I got in the line. She was like, you're not checked in for your flight. I was like, yeah, I don't have a phone. Why would I be checked in? And she was like, well, we should probably get you checked in. And I was like, that would be wonderful. And super nice woman. I made a friend along the way, who thought my experience was interesting, that I didn't have a phone. She printed me out a boarding pass and within 5 minutes, I was good to go. So, it wasn't like, I think there are all these concerns of like, okay, if I don't have a phone, I'm going to get screwed. I'm going to miss my flight. I'm not going to be able to do everything that I'm used to doing. I'm going to get stranded in the middle of a city. But ultimately, like, I ended up being fine. Like I said, I think having people to travel with was helpful. I think though, when I got there, everyone was so nice. So even if I didn't have a phone, like I'm sure somebody would have lent me a phone. I could have stopped at the airport, pulled up on my computer and sent an email if I needed to. So, I wouldn't recommend people start traveling without a phone because it's like, it is nice to be able to call if there's an emergency. But, luckily by having people, I got to take that gamble that one of them could help if there were an emergency. But to your other point, once I got there, I thought it was going to be like the most beautiful thing ever. I was like, I'm completely unplugged. I'm in the middle of beautiful Costa Rican jungle. Like it was literally the most beautiful place I've ever been to. And the first, like, I was there for 7 days, and the first 4 days were probably the most miserable part of this entire no phone experience, which is super unexpected, was super unexpected for me. But what had happened was I was finally in a place where I wasn't in a familiar environment. I had no access to the people in my life. So, I live with my girlfriend. So we spend every day together. I call my parents pretty frequently. And now all of a sudden I was in a place where I had limited internet connection. I was with a bunch of people that I work with that are also close friends. So it was like somewhat close connections, but still a little bit of this, like, I don't know how close we are. And I felt really alienated. I felt like I was completely alone and I had no way to distract myself. I had no way to communicate with the people that made me feel comfortable. And I basically went through an experience where I felt like a, 13, 14, 15-year-old kid again, who was not invited to the party, shows up to the party and is like unsure, where do I fit in this environment? And I was lucky that I had a couple people there that were super helpful, mentor-like figures that really talked through with me. And I was able to see what was going on, why I felt so bad. And then I was able to address it. but I never would have looked at that if I had my phone. I probably would have spent 90% of the trip on my phone. Anytime I was uncomfortable, I would have been on my phone. And the last 3 days were the best 3 days of this entire 30-day experience because I was able to get over that hump and deal with something that has really been a factor in my life for years.
It seems like you had to deal with a lot of emotions during this trip. And I noticed that that happens when I go overseas. I start thinking more and retrospective about my experience and my life and, all the things that are happening. So it's kind of like an ebb and flow that happens when you go overseas. But I think it was augmented for you because you had zero ways of communication, zero ways to distract yourself, pacify your thoughts with something more quote unquote interesting. But it was just like, no, I have to deal with it. And I think that's something that happens to a lot of people that decide to leave their smartphone. They don't get the rushes, the dopamine hits all the time because there's no more notifications. If when you have a flip phone, it's mainly messages and phone calls, and those are pretty boring compared to the world of smartphones. And that can be challenging for a lot of us. Let's talk about your richest learnings so far. You're on day 28. You're about to go into day 30. But what was the richest learning so far that you have had during this period? And how did you communicate? You said that you communicated with as many people as possible. But what were some other things that, in retrospect, you're like, man, I should have done that during this challenge period, or things that you want to take also into the future?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say for me, the biggest learning that I have had throughout this process is that the phone is really just a distraction. And it can be a useful distraction, right? There are times where we want to be distracted. I had moments throughout this 30 days where like I had to go sit in a doctor's office and I had nothing to do. And it was super boring. And I was like, it'd be great, like if I could have my phone and just like do something other than just sit here. But ultimately, I think the phone is a distraction. And I think the real question is, what are you distracting yourself from? And for me, that was a recognition that I have some things I need to work on. I have some stuff that is still, that I need to work through, whether it be in therapy, whether it be through other processes, or whether it be through just reconfiguring my life in a way that allows me to be happier offline. But I think the phone allowed all of that to be covered up. One of the interesting things I've been telling people is when I first got rid of it the first week, it was the worst week of sleep I've ever got in my entire life, which is fascinating because everyone was like, you're going to sleep like a baby. You're going to have no phone keeping you up. But what I realized is that I was using my phone in the last 2 hours before I went to bed as a way to like decompress. So I didn't have to think about work. I didn't have to think about all of the financial struggles that, the business was causing or anything of that nature. And all of that now started to come up and I had to just like sit. My mind would ruminate for like 2 hours before going to sleep. It has since corrected itself and I've been able to sleep so much better, but it took a lot of time. And I think, for anyone out there that is like thinking about this, it's not an easy experience getting rid of the phone. But I think I'll look back on it in like a year from now as like one of the most rewarding things I've done because I think it really showed me a lot of stuff about myself that I can now look at. One of the things we mentioned offline before jumping on here was that I want to do more stuff in my normal day-to-day life that doesn't relate to a screen. You mentioned to me that you go to a book club and you've taken art classes and you go for walks and all of these things. And, I've done a little bit of that in the last 30 days where like I tried to set up a better morning routine for myself, but I haven't really taken the delve yet into like, let me start doing different things with all of this time that I now have back. I've spent more time sitting, reflecting, more time working, but I think that's one of the things that I really want to do going forward is just finding new activities that bring me joy. Because I think that's the key. We're all trying to look for things that fill us up. And, there are much better activities out there that don't have to be distractions. They can actually like put you in your body, allow you to connect with people, allow you to do the things you want to do. And I think that like that is the key, is finding those activities that fill you up or finding a lifestyle that fills you up.
Absolutely. I think creating a lifestyle, and I talk about it from that perspective. When you're trying to move offline, you have to create a low tech lifestyle first. And then after that, you start replacing those behaviors that were, you know, satisfying, like watching a YouTube video, watching a Netflix show, whatever it is. This was satisfying. And then you need to find the satisfaction somewhere else. So as you're reflecting on that is quite important. I'd like to touch on one more question before we get to the final area, which is, what was the detriment of your relationships, or were your relationships better, more real, or they felt less short texts and more long conversations? Or was that a detriment? Was that a positive thing? How did your relationships change during this time period?
Yeah, I have seen a really interesting shift in a lot of relationships, in those relationships with the friends and work colleagues that I traveled with. There was a lot more depth that I feel like I went into that I don't think I would have ever done before without a phone or with a phone. So, I think not having the distraction really forced me to open up to people when I was feeling down, because I had nothing to pull me away from that. And I think when we can open up to people, it creates this closeness that we don't have. A lot of times our relationships are surface level, even with like friends that we have had for years, because all you do is talk about, basic stuff, going out, partying, sex life, you know, work, etc. Like it's not really ever like, hey man, how are you doing? And especially as men, I feel that like that's a thing that I have not had in a lot of relationships where like I don't have a lot of close friends who are like, how are you? And like they care and they want to know. And I think that's because like it's just not something that we've been conditioned to be able to do. It's uncomfortable. And I think, in these moments in the last month, I had friends who saw me struggle that were there with me and they cared and they really had to care because like I had no way to cover it up. I had no way to like fake that I was okay. So it was just raw. I'm sure, and I know for a fact that there are a couple of friends who have tried to contact me, who have since contacted my girlfriend, being like, "What's the deal with Andrew? Why is he like not responding to my text?" But I think anyone that like is really offended and is not going to speak to me after this is not a friend that I want to have anyway. So I think a lot of people, I'm sure I've missed out on text. I'm sure I've missed out on, my dad even was like, "Hey, I sent you something on Instagram the other day," and I was like, "Great, I'll see it, whenever this experience is done." But yeah, I think it really has deepened my relationships. And I think the more that I progress forward in the learnings that I've had throughout this experience, the more that I adjust my life following, I think the deeper that a lot of them will go.
That sounds amazing and also overwhelming, right? Like there's a lot of different things that you have to deal with, especially as you return and as you see all of the barrage of messages, invitations, different things that were sent to you, and you had to process all of those emotions kind of like as a backlog. But it's good to hear that you have found a way to differentiate between those people that are truly there for you and those that were only there for you because you were available. And I think that makes a big difference in our lives. So talk to us about, this is the last question, then I'll give you a final word. Talk to us about the future. What is going to be Andrew's upcoming changes? Are you going to go back to a smartphone, phone, whatever? What is your plan to move offline or to find some of that satisfaction outside of the online experience?
Yeah, I think as I near the end, I'm like, I don't want to bring it back. I'm like, I want to live without a phone forever. I know that that's not helpful for a lot of people. I know that there have been inconveniences for certain people in my life as well. So I know that that's not something I can do forever. What I think I'm going to try first, and this is my hypothesis, and I do believe that there will be a day where I will just have to completely go with, as you coined, the nuclear option and get rid of my smartphone completely. But my first attempt will be to get rid of all social media and shift that to an iPad. I bought used iPad for like $150, and at least I can have that in a drawer. I can use it for work purposes. So I'm not going to be walking around with an iPad. So there'll be no ability for me to access social media on my phone. And I found for me that that was the biggest use of my time was Instagram, YouTube. And I think removing all of those, removing Netflix, removing any app that like is pure enjoyment is phase one. And then phase two will be trying to convert my phone to a dumb phone where there's a couple apps out there that can change the home screen interface so it looks more like the light phone, where you have written out, icons instead of like the flashy ones with, bright greens and bright reds that really call your attention. And then I think I'm going to have a bunch of usage rules. So it's been in a lockbox for 30 days. I really like that for my work environment. So I think I'm going to pretty much lock it in a lockbox from like 8 p.m. to 2 p.m. Before 2 p.m., nobody really needs me urgently. It's my time to do deep work. If you're on my calendar, you're on my calendar. But I don't want to be distracted before that time period. And then from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., it's 6 hours. If people need to get me, we can talk. If I need to respond to stuff, I can, but I don't have to check it 24/7. And then I think just whenever I can, if I go on vacation, if I want to go somewhere, if I'm around people and the people in my life are like, yeah, sure, fine, leave it. I'll handle like any emergency communications. Then I think I will just more frequently be willing to leave it.
That sounds like a good plan. It sounds like you're thinking about your usage and how you're going to approach it in the future with clear expectations, and maybe the lockbox will be that cheat sheet, that allows you to not have to be, all the time in the internet or, the metaverse nowadays, as we call it. Thank you for your time, Andrew. As always, I like to leave my guests with a final word. So any words of encouragement, how to find you, your work, and if you are open for new clients or all of that good stuff, let us know. And anything else you want to tell the people.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, if anybody is thinking about any form of like phone detox, what I've been like telling all of my friends is I'm like, just do it for a weekend. I think that like what I like to do in my work, what I like to create is like, I like to go to the extreme so that other people don't have to, but a weekend is not that extreme. So if, people are debating like, okay, the phone is really getting to be an addictive substance. I don't really know what my life looks like without it. 27. So I got a phone when I was 10 years old. So for more than half of my life, almost 2/3 of my life, I have had a phone in my hand. And I'm sure a lot of people are like that as well, especially the people that are suffering the most with phone usage. It's the generation below me that's had it since they were 5, 6, 7 years old, where you don't really remember a life before a phone. And I think regardless of like, if you feel like it needs to go, or if you're just like, I want to challenge myself because it feels like a good thing to do, I think a weekend is a really good challenge. And I've been recommending it to all my friends. And then I've also been buying all of my friends' phone lock boxes because I'm like, this is just super interesting to like lock it and not be able to get it. So also worth a try. They're easy to find on Amazon. But yeah, in terms of what I do, you can just find me on YouTube. It's just my name. I just like to, put myself through experiences and create really beautiful stories that showcase that and hopefully help people along the way. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I think it's been a really wonderful experience. I've gotten to connect with people like you, which is super cool. And I don't feel like we would have if I didn't do this. So I'm just really grateful for, the technological world we live in, which has allowed me to reduce my use of technology.
That was Andrew Feinstein, and you can find all of his content by the YouTube channel on his name. You can check the name and all the links in the description below. Thank you for listening to Moving Offline. We appreciate your support and listening and sharing this episode, and of course, reviewing it if you have such a platform. Thanks again, and hopefully you get to do more goals in your life that give you satisfaction in the offline world. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.